We're now 102 days into the Trump administration, which means, of course, it's time to start talking about 2020.
Overdue.
This morning.
Let's get to it.
This morning, plenty of pieces about whether or not Joe Biden will enter that race. Politico reports, quote, privately, the former vice president and his staff had started talking about how to begin planning a strategy with a roughly 18-month timeline so that if he decides on another presidential run, he'll be best positioned to get it off the ground. Biden will be 77 by the time of the next Iowa caucuses, but Biden 2020 might just happen, and Biden has a breakneck schedule in the days to come, appearing at events with New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, with Democrats in Florida, and at the SALT conference with other political and economics luminaries. Even so, here's the former vice president last night in New Hampshire speaking to 800 Democrats.
When I got asked by Ray to come up here, there wasn't a doubt in my mind. Even though I know it caused a lot of speculations, guys, I'm not running, okay? I continue to do everything in my power to support the Democratic Party, elect Democrats at every level across this nation. I meant it because it is important. I'm ready to help raise money, recruit candidates, campaign, so is Barack, wherever you want. Just let me know, because it's important. No, I'm not looking for applause. It's really, really, genuinely important.
The New York Times also reports that Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren could be prohibitive favorites should they get in for 2020. And that, while as much as a quarter of the Democrats' 48 members in the Senate are giving some consideration to running, there is a generational divide with Cory Booker, Kirsten Gillibrand, Amy Klobuchar, and Kamala Harris on the younger end. Others said to be considering bids, high-profile mayors, Mitch Landrieu of New Orleans and Eric Garcetti of Los Angeles, as well as Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, a veteran of the Iraq War. President Trump was in Atlanta Friday for the NRA convention, and while he was there, he made his own prediction about the election 4 years away.
I have a feeling that in the next election, you're going to be swamped with candidates, but you're not going to be wasting your time. You'll have plenty of those Democrats coming over, and you're going to say, no, sir, no, thank you. No, ma'am, perhaps, ma'am. It may be Pocahontas. Remember that.
President using that term to refer to Senator Elizabeth Warren. And joining us now, Deputy Editorial Page Editor and columnist at The Washington Post, Ruth Marcus. Ruth, good morning. Welcome to the conversation. Mark and John, let me begin with you as the resident game changers. This is more than just a parlor game. This is a question about who the Democratic Party is and who represents it. Is it a younger progressive? Is it Joe Biden? What do you take away from this conversation right now? Where is the party headed? Does it have any idea where it's headed?
It's wide open. In fact, if you look at the chance of being the Democratic nominee with no clear frontrunner, less clarity than any race in either party in my career, and the prospect of running against Donald Trump, given his current approval ratings and the tough political environment he faces, it's not a guarantee that if you become the Democratic nominee, you'll become president, but it is as clean a shot as you could imagine having at this point. And so it is wide open. And I think you'll see speculation continue. And because it's so wide open, there's an incentive now to get in early and to try to get a little bit of a lead and try to narrow down people's consideration. So I suspect this will be as wild a thing as we've seen, and it started basically last night with Joe Biden in New Hampshire.
John and Mike, you can answer this too because you know Biden so well. Is the Joe Biden conversation real, or is it sort of wistfulness for what might have been the last time around?
Well, I think there's no doubt Joe Biden would like to be president of the United States, and I think there's some part of him that doesn't like the idea of anybody telling him he can't run. You know, whether there's always a big space between, cup and lip when it comes to Biden and running for president. So, he is not in step with where the party is right now and where it's headed, which is to say further and further to the left, more and more progressive. And he's a gentleman in his early 70s who's going to be in his middle 70s by the time we get there, which is another issue that afflicts the person who is, I think, would ordinarily, if not for age, be the prohibitive frontrunner, who's named Bernie Sanders, who came close to winning the Democratic nomination last time and is right now the most popular politician in the country by some polling metrics, right? And who continues to be the only person aside from Donald Trump who can go to any state, any city, anywhere in the country on a moment's notice and get 5,000 or 10,000 people to show up at an event for him. But he would be 74 or 75 by the time we get around to 2020. So, doesn't mean he can't run. And I know Sanders is thinking about it, but it is it's a tall order for somebody of that age to run for president, given the physical and other demands that would be put on him.
Ruth, what do you think about that? I mean, you get Bernie Sanders, he'll be 77, 78 or so in a few years. The former Vice President, Joe Biden, who has a deep appreciation of what fate and life can do to you, will be 77, and they are the two, perhaps arguably, leading candidates on the Democratic side of the ballot right now.
It's pretty incredible state of affairs, and the graying of the Democratic Party, at least in its electoral ranks and possible presidential ranks, is something I think should really give pause to Democrats. And one of the reasons for that is, of course, what happened during the Obama administration, which was the wiping out of the Democratic bench, not just losing the House and the Senate, but losing something like 900 legislative seats. You grow presidential candidates from the ground up, usually, except if they're real estate tycoons. The Democrats aren't growing people who can be governors, who then can be presidential candidates. That's not going to solve their problem necessarily this time around, but I do think that look, 70 might be the new 60, maybe 80 is the new 70. That's awfully old for a job as demanding as the president, with no disrespect to the current office holder or two, pretty energetic guys who might be interested.
So, Elise, let's talk now about the other end of the spectrum, this younger group, as we're putting it in terms of age for this conversation anyway. Cory Booker, Kirsten Gillibrand, Seth Moulton was a name that came up. People like that. Who's the most promising of that group for Democrats?
I personally think that Kirsten Gillibrand is the most interesting, because she's a charismatic woman who, her voting record up against Trump, if she chose to try to put in a nod for the nomination, I think that would bode well for her in a Democratic primary. But that said, it just is way too early. And also, I really don't think that it is going to necessarily be an incumbent politician who ends up winning the Democratic nomination. I think that national level politics is fundamentally changed. I think that name recognition is so important, especially going up against a Donald Trump. And I think that we could see some really interesting outside contenders surface.
Yeah, people you have to be famous, or have the capacity to get famous quickly. You also either have to have a lot of money yourself, be able to raise a lot of money, or be able to do what Donald Trump did, which is to use social media and earned media to get access to voters without paid advertising. I look at all these names, and I don't see very many people on the list who even have the potential to do that.
Well, but there is one person I know we both think, that you just don't sleep on Kamala Harris, I think is, for reasons that you just talked about. She's not famous yet, but she could get famous quick. And she's a compelling figure, African-American woman from California who could raise a ton of money and could very quickly, in the way that Barack Obama did, with one moment, could become a huge superstar in the party. She hasn't had that moment like Obama's convention speech yet, but she could, and she could suddenly be on a rocket ship ride towards national fame.
She's not been a monster fundraiser in California.
She has access to it. I think if she became, she had capacity for it to tap into some pretty deep wallets if she decided to go this direction.
So Ruth, let me ask you, Kamala Harris, or any of the candidates who might be at the top of the ballot in the Democrats in a couple of years, are they going to have to deal, or ought they to deal, or might they be forced to deal with the phrase deplorables, which from some people's views did such damage to the basic Democratic core constituency? How would she do that, or how would any Democrat do that?
Any Democrat who's running is going to have to make sure that he or she addresses the question of the angry-ish or anxious working class voter, white working class voter. Simply relying on demographics to get there is a dangerous route. And so being able to speak to the anger and frustration with Washington, to the economic anxiety that helped to propel both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, is going to be really essential for the Democratic nominee, whether it's Bernie Sanders or somebody else. And you can't treat people with disrespect and then ask for their votes. That's just like a fact of political life. So we're going to have to find a way to address the anxiety. Democrats are going to have to try to find a way to address the anxiety and to come up with programs that appeal to these voters.
So, Ruth, as we talk about a potential next president, your column is about the previous president. You criticized President Obama for hitting the big money speaking circuit after reports say he and the former First Lady also signed a $60 million joint book deal. You write, in part, in collecting $400,000 from a Wall Street investment firm to make a single speech, Barack Obama is following in the Gucci-clad footsteps of past presidents. But to acknowledge that Obama has plenty of precedent on his side is not to say that his choice is wise. Indeed, it's unfortunate. Obama's propulsion onto the lecture circuit arrives at a moment of populist disgust with Wall Street greed and the Washington swamp. It comes after a campaign in which Hillary Clinton's Goldman Sachs speaking fees become a symbol of entitled elitism. So imagine the powerful message Obama would have sent, the reverse precedent, had he chosen to renounce this road to riches. And Ruth, you actually had Elizabeth Warren herself saying she was troubled by the reports that he was taking $400,000 from Wall Street, especially given the attacks he made on Wall Street over the last 8 years or so. Is he not, though, entitled? He's not running for office the way Hillary Clinton was. It's not something he has to think about. Is he not entitled to go make money as he pleases?
He is totally entitled to go make money, and legally he's totally entitled to go make money as he pleases. And historically, as I said, this is a well-trodden path. But he could have chosen to send a different message. And by the way, in terms of making money, his book deals his and Michelle Obama, the former First Lady's book deals, are reported to be somewhere between $60 and $65 million. Seems like a lot of money to me, enough to live on, give a lot to charity, help your foundation. And look, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier and the ability of the Democrats to speak to voters who feel like the Democratic Party and Washington are not attentive to their issues. Just think about the signal it would have sent if the former president had just quietly said, I'm not going on the lecture circuit. It would have, not that Donald Trump would have renounced the lecture circuit in the future. He's going to make money when he leaves office in all the ways he likes to make money. But it would have said, enough is enough. We are not the party of Wall Street. President Obama, I'm going to say this in a little bit of a sharp way, did not leave the Democratic Party in great shape. Maybe he could have helped it a little bit by not opening this front of, I'm sure you're going to hear Republican candidates talking about him vacuuming up checks. It somewhat tarnishes his power as a surrogate for candidates. And I'm not saying it's logical or compelled, but it would have been a nice signal if he had done it. And I've been writing about this problem with lots of different presidents.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.